Well, good evening from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and from campus of LSU, and from Washington, D.C. I'm David Shribman. I'm the Executive Editor Emeritus of the Post-Gazette, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you across the country in the Pittsburgh area, ships at sea, Newfoundland, Montreal, Boston, everywhere, for this town meeting sponsored by the Post-Gazette and by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield to discuss the 2020 election. You know, before we start, let me say that I've covered elections for the past 40 or so years. Every 4 years, we're told by the candidates and by commentators, this is the most important election of our lifetime. Well, let me just say, this actually is the one time when it is the most important election of our lifetime. And in that context, it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce my other two guests and colleagues. Sitting there in Louisiana is James Carville, the Raging Cajun, the Democratic strategist, teacher at LSU, and creator of the greatest aphorism about Pennsylvania politics ever. We'll get to that. That's James over there. He's the one in the hat. And the other gentleman is Albert Hunt, who for almost 40 years has been my friend, teacher, and colleague, and co-conspirator. He is former Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, also of Bloomberg, a syndicated columnist for the Hill newspaper, and probably the single most accomplished and knowledgeable Washington commentator. So we're going to have a conversation here for an hour about an election that's lasted for what seems like 4 years. And we're going to talk about the 2016 election, the 2020 election. Maybe we'll talk about 2024. It's got to be better than this one. And we'll also entertain your questions about halfway through. So if you have questions, you all know what to do. There's a Q&A function. Just get on that, and we'll talk about what you want to talk about first. But first, I want to ask Albert and to ask James to put this campaign in perspective. You both either covered or participated in campaigns going back to '76, I think. How does this rate? What the questions that are at stake here? The stakes themselves. How do you put this in perspective? You want to start, Al? Albert? Well, we'll go to James.
Okay. Thank you, David. And I love Pittsburgh. I ran campaigns in Pennsylvania. I spent a lot of time in the city. We did this forum in person for COVID, so it's really kind of an honor. There's no put this in perspective. There's no historical reference point for this. You can have all of the experience in the world. You have one candidate who, for all intents and purposes, I can't determine that he's really trying to win the election. He's going to Rome, Georgia, which is the 14th congressional district of Georgia. It's probably the reddest congressional district in the world, going to stand up with the QAnon candidate. He was in Arizona making fun of the Republican Senate candidate. I mean, there's no effort. It doesn't seem to me that he's trying to do something other than win the election. He came in with 46%, and he's done everything that he possibly could to not expand his coalition. So every campaign that I've been involved in, and I've known many people who've been involved on the other side, they all had one thing in common. They were trying to win. I mean, that was the kind of goal, and you were trying to get people to like you and vote for you. You didn't always succeed, but this is a new strategy, if you will. I mean, he's doing everything that he can to chase the very people that he needs to win the election away from him. It's really befuddling to me, and everybody assumes that there's some strategic underlying genius here, and boy, if there is, it is a genius that I have yet to detect. And he's taken the Republican Party and made it a personality cult with a base of a part of America that's shrinking every day. And it's just amazing to be in a race where literally 75% of the Republican consultants that I've worked against in my life or appeared in, opposite on TV or forums like this are like they're more for Biden than I am. I mean, it's really remarkable. And he's trying to run off every possible growing demographic in the country, people with a college education, people who non-white people. It's stunning that for 53% of people who vote are females, he's doing everything he can to get them not to vote for him. So I would say, honestly, there is no historical perspective. I've been doing this, since I was in the 70s probably. In Louisiana, I started running campaigns outside of Louisiana in 1982. And I'll be honest with you, David, I've never seen anything like it. There's no historical reference point that I have. I've tried to stop figuring this guy out. I thought when he was stuck at 43% the Wall Street Journal poll in January, any politician with a crisis like COVID would have come along. They would have said, this is a political opportunity for me. And every governor that was involved saw their ratings go up. And there's somebody got to be a lot smarter now to figure this guy out. I'll be honest with you.
Okay, let's see if we can get Albert on.
Hey, David, I'm back. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened with the connection, but I endorse everything James said. I don't know what he said, but I endorse it.
Whatever it was. Well, what he said, Al, was that the Trump campaign must have a special genius because it has been able to see a route to the White House that no other living human being has been able to find, because it seems to want to alienate all of the moving parts of the election. That's basically what he had to say.
I think both a number of Democrats and the top Trump advisors, for different reasons, both are living in a year. The problem is the year is 2016, not 2020. And it is profoundly different this year than it was last time. And I think some of the top Trump political lieutenants, either out of fear of telling him bad news or because they have to, protect their own fortunes, are deluding themselves. I don't see any path to victory for Donald Trump. I will say that 2 weeks ago, I thought it was going to be more lopsided than I think it's going to be today, but I think it's going to be decisive. And if Tim Russert were here, he would have that white chalkboard up. And you know what it would say, David?
Go ahead.
Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania.
Right.
I don't think Pennsylvania will be determinative in the end, because I think that Biden's going to win well over 300 electoral votes. However, if I have overestimated badly, and it's a really close election, the single most important state will be Pennsylvania.
Well, let's first of all, before we move to Pennsylvania, I wanted to ask each of you. You've talked a lot about the campaign that Donald Trump's running. How about the campaign that Joe Biden is running? Is he in fact running a campaign at all?
James?
Yes, he's running a campaign, and actually, if he's running a pretty good campaign, he does limited events. He does not risk his own health. He doesn't risk the health of his supporters. I thought his event in Warm Springs was great. My only, slight beef is I wish, I think he and President Obama ought to go to Rio Grande Valley in Texas. I think this is going to be a decisive win, a very decisive win. And I don't think he's any worse than 50-50 in Texas. I think he's above 50-50 in Georgia. It would be like if we were having a race and we were contesting Illinois, all right? I mean, right. This is where he is. And there's no, if you read the story in the Times today, you would see that. I actually, in Georgia, the last 5 polls I've seen, he's ahead. There is some evidence, I wouldn't want to jump to over-conclude this, but I've seen a couple of private polls today. They're in Florida, which looks kind of squirrely, is starting to, I think, look better. And I don't see any path for victory. The public averages have barely budged over a period of time. I know some of you see but I'm told literally to a person that the polling on the congressional districts is more favorable than either the state polling or the national polling. Yep. So I remain very, very bullish, and I'm very, particularly on Pennsylvania. Albert's right. It's the keystone state and it's really the keystone state in this election. If Biden wins Pennsylvania, which he's going to do, there's a 90, according to 538, there's a 96% chance he wins the election. So this is game, set, match. After Pennsylvania comes in, which is going to come in, well, now we're talking about margin. I really believe that. And I don't see a route. We had Senator Casey on our podcast yesterday, and he's never going to be declarative, but to the extent that Senator Casey can be declarative, I would describe his mood as quite optimistic about Pennsylvania. And I work for his father, and I'm very optimistic and bullish about our chances. And I think of course, I was hopeful, but I think we're going to have a decisive win Tuesday night.
David, let me pick up on Biden. Yeah. I think in a normal year, running against a normal incumbent, a normal Republican, I'm not sure Joe Biden would be the ideal candidate. He is 77. I know what that's like, and he's been around for a while. I think it may be that this year he is the perfect antidote to Donald Trump. And I think he deserves enormous credit for last year. What Joe Biden realized, which Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke didn't, was that the Democratic election of 2018 and the Democratic Party is a progressive center-left party. It is not a radical left-wing party. And that's what Joe Biden ran on. And it was not for Medicare for all, but for expanding affordable health care, not for the Green Deal Act, but for setting a reasonable target for ending carbon emissions. He was not for eliminating ICE, but reforming it. And Jim Clyburn made the most significant endorsement of our lifetime, maybe, but Joe had set the predicate. And I think that positioned him well, not only for the general, but in the Democratic primary. And they deserve credit for that.
Now, Albert, and also James, we've known, all three of us have known Joe Biden since the 70s. When you and I met first, Albert, in 1979, if I had told you that 41 years later, Joe Biden would be the savior of the Democratic Party, what would you have said?
Hell, if you had told me 41 years ago that you and I would be on a goddamn podcast, I'd have said, bring the people in the white coats in. No, I would have said no. But even more, I would have said no after the run he made in 1987. It wasn't bad. I mean, you read Richard Ben Kramer's account. It makes you laugh and cry at the same time. It was tragic.
But it was chaos.
It wasn't a whole lot better in 2007 and 8. But, this is such a trite term, but first, I think Joe Biden has grown. I think the vice presidency helped that. He was a good senator, but he was a wild card often, as you know. And I think he is the right person for these times. I really think that.
And James, your view?
Well, look, I'm a little bit. What he did, he had one thing. He understood the Democratic Party, and he laid it out. He really didn't have a campaign as such until Congressman Clyburn dropped the hammer.
Right.
I mean, they didn't have much of a fundraising operation. They didn't have, like, field offices. They had some, obviously they had some union support and things like that. But what he did better than anybody else, and remember, he lost in Iowa, and he lost in New Hampshire, and he lost in Nevada. But he understood at the core that who the Democratic Party was. Once Clyburn dropped the hammer, the African-American constituents in South Carolina voted, and he won, the entire party. You started seeing it all change. You go to Northern Virginia and Loudoun and Fairfax and Prince William and places like that. Livingston County, Michigan, for God's sakes. Everybody said, that's it. We just want to win. And it was just this massive conclusion that a political party came to almost instantly. And I say he had one idea, and that was the right idea. We thought, well, maybe the party is looking for something more energy, or we're looking for this. The Democratic Party in February right now is concerned about one thing, I think, getting this guy out of here. And if they would have concluded any one of these candidates were better to get him out of there they would have coalesced. And Biden ran a smart campaign. He did not, he understood the party. He understood that it was not a radical left party. And he came across as that. And I think he had a good conclusion and a good idea who the party is. The Democratic Party is, for the most part, African Americans and suburban educated females. I mean, those have become our biggest constituencies right now. So I give him a lot of credit for that. And, it might be, I think it was Disraeli that said a politician has to know himself and the times. It might just be that Biden knows both. Right. And it might just be that his voters know both.
Yeah, and David, I traveled with him a little bit in 2018, and I did not think he would be the nominee then. So I'm not going to pretend I had great prescience. I really didn't. But one thing I did note was that there were, wherever you went in the country, whether it was Texas, whether it was Michigan, whether it was Florida, California, Alabama in 2017, they were happy to have Joe Biden come in and help. Any Democrat was. And there were Democrats that didn't want the Clintons, didn't want Barack Obama, but they wanted Joe Biden. So it wasn't that he was off the charts and he was going to galvanize everyone, but he was acceptable to everyone. And as James said, what this party wants is to get rid of what they consider this menace in the White House. And when you're acceptable to everyone, and then you are able to get Clyburn and take off, it just folded. And he prepared himself for that, and he deserves credit.
Yeah, Doug Jones had him come into Alabama in 2017.
Right.
He would have brought not a single other, national Democratic figure to Alabama in 2017.
Right.
And this time he's campaigning in Arizona, Ohio, Georgia, places where Democrats don't ordinarily have a great.
He's going to win. He's going to win Georgia. All right. Well, he's going to win Georgia.
That's a fire bell in the night, isn't it?
But the thing is, Georgia, remember Virginia in 2004 was a red state? It didn't even stop at the swing state station. All right. It just went blue in 2008, and it gets bluer and bluer. That's going to be Georgia. Metropolitan Atlanta looks like metropolitan Los Angeles.
And how about Ohio, guys?
I thought Ohio was going the way of Missouri in 2018. I really did. Rather than, I thought the choice kind of that collective electorate was, are you Pennsylvania and you're going to stay kind of purple, maybe even tilting a little blue, or you're going the way of Missouri? And they had a terrible year in 2018. But I think it's in play now. I think it's harder than Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin. But I think if Biden wins this thing by 7 or 8 points, he's going to carry Ohio.
Sherrod Brown is dead cinch certain that they will win Ohio. Big vote out of Cleveland, big vote out of Columbus.
Franklin County, right?
Yeah. So I have a friend I was helping, a guy named Fallon Rucker running for the DA in Hamilton County. And I think that Hillary carried it by 10. They don't have a poll with Biden under 17.
This is Hamilton County?
Cincinnati,
yeah. It's very Republican, right?
Well, not so much. She carried about 10 ordinarily. So the suburb, the city is more Democratic. Right. But and one of the things, and Albert will attest to this, people like David Wasserman, Mark Gersh, I'm talking about people that see Jim Gerstein, I'm talking about people that see more congressional polls than anybody in the country. And to a person, they will tell you that the congressional polls look better for Democrats than the state polls or even the national polls. And we can get into the polls and why they were wrong or anything like that, but the evidence I see in the polling average is encouraging, and a lot of the anecdotal evidence I see, to some extent, is even more encouraging.
So let's talk about Pennsylvania. I'm sitting in Pennsylvania right now. James, you spend a lot of time here. Albert, you have as well. So let's start with James. Tell us the one important sentence that you promulgated, the aphorism you promulgated about Pennsylvania. We'll go from there.
Well, what I actually said was from Paoli, which is the westernmost suburb of Philadelphia, to Penn Hills, which is the easternmost suburb of Pittsburgh. It was Alabama without black people. It has since been gone as Pennsylvania with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Alabama in the middle. My point of course, everybody from Pennsylvania understands exactly what I'm saying, is that the T at the center of the state is very traditional, very conservative, acts more like to some extent, sometimes people call it Pennsatucky. But if I was looking at this election, if there was one county, the returns that I'm going to want to see, it's going to be Erie.
Yep.
Right. I think we'll know a lot when we see Erie County come. And there's a lot of others, but that would be the headline county.
And let's remember that Trump was in Erie County the other day. Erie County is the home of Tom Ridge, who was the governor, congressman, and a Republican member of a cabinet. And I talked to him this week, in fact, yesterday, and he's voting for Biden. That's Tom Ridge.
And says Biden will carry Erie. I think. Right. Look. James is a genius on Pennsylvania, even though I'm a native. But David, I look at Pennsylvania and just as oversimplified and not geographically correct. I divide it into quadrants, and the quadrants are Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, if you will, the two big cities. Right. Secondly, the quadrants, the Northeast and Northwest. They're far apart, but it's Luzerne, and Northampton, and also Erie. And then central Pennsylvania and the huge Philadelphia suburbs, which are the most populous. They really are. And I think if you look at that as quadrants, that Trump will clearly carry the central. The Northeast and Northwest will be close, maybe a little bit Trump, but he won't carry it by as much as he carried it last time. And I think Biden will carry Pittsburgh and Philadelphia by as much, and by more, actually. And he's going to run up he carried those 4 Philadelphia suburbs by 180,000. He'll carry them by over 250,000. I think that reflects a fondness for Joe, who grew up, about 45 minutes away, but it reflects these suburbs just cannot stand Donald Trump.
And those suburbs have been Republican until recently, since the Civil War. And if you look at, I know we don't usually look at county commissioner elections, but in those 3 counties, all had elected Democratic county commissioners in 2019. It's a huge precursor.
It was the heart of Eisenhower country. I grew up in one of those counties, and I remember my dad one time saying about this guy who lived, close by. He said, "Bill, he lives down there." He said, "He's a good guy now. He's a Democrat," because it was so rare. These counties are now blue, and they are populous. That's about 23% of the vote. But I think it's significant, and James has played a huge role in this, that those places that are going to go for Trump, last time in a county, Cambria or Washington, where he got 67, 64%, he's going to get 62 or 61. And Biden may not carry Luzerne, but he'll do better than Hillary did up there. So I think the margins are going to be significantly different, and the places of Democratic strongholds will be stronger. But James, you weigh in. You're encyclopedic on Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm not. But look, I'm part of a group of American Bridge. It's not a secret. We're spending $80 million in 77 counties in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, because and these are all counties that Obama did significantly better than we did in 2016. And I think I see a lot of polling from these areas. And you're right, we're not going to carry Westmoreland County, but I guarantee you we're going to cut the margin. I guarantee you that. And we're probably not, we don't carry Luzerne County, but we're going to cut the margin, or Cambria. And Albert's exactly right. But, it's not about how much if you lose, it's how much you lose by. And Albert, correct me if I'm wrong, but Senator Casey said in 2018 he ran better in Philadelphia than even Barack Obama did.
He got a higher percentage, and he said delightfully, that was not due to my charisma. That was due to the fact that they cannot stand Donald Trump. Right.
And Philadelphia, by the way, the city is only 13, but it's significant, but it's 13% of the state. It votes for 13%. It might vote a little bit more this time.
So how much do you think, James, this state has changed since 1991 when you ran the Harris-Wofford campaign?
So in 1990, well, let's go back to 1986, and it was a little better than 91. We needed 37 and change out of Delaware, Montgomery, Bucks, and Chester, I guess, suburb counties. Shoot, I'd get 67. But we carried Beaver County, and we carried everything out there,
Washington,
you name it,
right.
Washington, we carried all of that and carried it big. So the shift is not, and you've had, of course, you have real growth in Allegheny. All right, you've had real growth in the Philadelphia suburbs, but the real shift is that the Democratic coalition has really shifted, and it's probably been as pronounced in Pennsylvania as any state. I mean, it's still the same, geographic parts. It's still the same thing, but you just have these massive, what's happened is education has become just a huge predictor of the vote, and particularly among whites. I mean, that's where the real change has come.
I think, David, there's no state that is, maybe with the exception of Virginia so far, that has changed as profoundly. I mean, if Michael Dukakis, who was not exactly a cultural conservative, carried Westmoreland and Washington counties in 1988 and got just clobbered in Montgomery and Delaware, that's done a complete flip. And I think that's probably good news on balance for Democrats, because the places where they're strong are the faster growing places.
Now, I was in Wisconsin over the weekend, guys, and everybody, the big folklore, of course, from 2016 is, had Hillary actually set down there once, she'd have won the state. She lost the state by about 46,000 votes. Biden has been there, and of course, Trump has been there. What do you see about Wisconsin?
Well, I'll pick up, because I talked to Charles Franklin, who runs the Marquette poll this afternoon.
Right.
ABC had a poll that had Biden up 17. I don't believe that. There's something flawed about that. But the Marquette poll today had him up 5, Biden up 5. But it's a solid 5, David. It's not, whatever the poll showed 5-6 days before the election. There's very little undecided. People say they're not going to change their mind. There may be some voting problems, but they're not going to be huge. They're coming in very, very heavy numbers. They have maybe the best state chairman in the country. And I think the only question is, what will Biden's margin be? It may be 5. It could be as high as 10 out there. But James, do you dissent at all?
No, I think it'll be much closer to 10 than 5. Mm-hmm. And because I think, and we got to understand, all of these posters, and they're all good. It's not Charles Franklin is a top poster. They are so, you should read David Wasserman on NBC News site. There's no paywall there. And there's a good piece by a guy named Derek Thompson in the Atlantic. And this is my theory. Can I quantitatively prove it? No, but I got a hunch I'm right. Is they were so traumatized by 2016 and not having the right share of older whites and non-college whites, that I think that they're overcompensating. And I think that and everybody has the share of the young vote fixed at a pretty low number. I think the ratio of young voters in this election is going to surprise people on the upside. That's a mega prediction I make, and that is going to help the Democrats up.
Well, I think it's young voters and older voters. Albert, you wrote recently about older voters.
Yeah, how about my people, the geezers? I think the geezers are going to go. They went heavily for Trump last time by 10, 15 points. In Pennsylvania, I think he carried the seniors by, I think it was 12 points. And the good surveys that I've seen in Pennsylvania now shows Biden winning the seniors. Why is that? I think part of it has to be the pandemic. I mean, senior citizens have been far more afflicted by the pandemic, and they realize that this has been a colossal governmental failure. Maybe a little bit fears of Trump, as he said at Davos, cutting Social Security and Medicare, but I think it's primarily driven by the pandemic. And I think that's going to be very big in states like Pennsylvania, Florida, Maine, which has a very big senior citizen population.
Now, speaking of Maine, what do all of you think about the future employment prospects of Susan Collins?
Go ahead, Albert, because you got a better take on that than I do.
I would certainly bet on Gideon. I think it's conceivable that Collins finishes in a tie or even a little bit ahead in the first voting. But as you know, they have something called ranked voting, where you pick a second and third choice. That's how the Democratic congressman in the 2nd district won in 2018. There's a highly respected Colby College, David, as we know, had a poll out the other day, which is a pretty good poll in the past, as getting up 4. But even if it ends up in a dead heat or even a 1-point Collins advantage, I don't see how she survives the ranked voting, just as the Republican couldn't survive it last time.
Yeah, the other thing to remember, Maine is the most rural state in America.
Right.
The percent of Maine that is rural is higher than any place else. A lot of people claim to be quirky. I think Maine can claim that definition. It's quite quirky.
It is. David, we still have you? James, are you there?
I'm right here. Yes, sir.
If we lost,
but let's just talk about,
you and I may have to carry this.
We may have to. We may have to carry this.
I think that's true, though. I hope that people can hear this, because it is really, maybe Virginia has changed more, as you noted earlier. But you look at your campaign you ran for Bob Casey in '86 or Harris Wofford in '91. There has been a 180 from the east and the west, the Philadelphia suburbs, versus those old steel and coal towns. Counties.
But what Virginia has grown, what's different is Virginia has grown a lot faster than Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, Pennsylvania, and wherever you've had growth, it's Allegheny and it's the Philadelphia suburbs mostly.
Right.
Maybe you had a little bit in the Lehigh Valley, but
right.
So that makes it a little bit different. I come in this election, and I think the Sun Belt states are just going to be a shock to people. I think most political insiders understand what's happened in Georgia and Texas and Arizona and places like that. But I think that it's going to be a shock to the general public. And I think it's going to be, of course, it's very important that the Democrats win back Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But the real shock is going to be in those states. And the American politics, the political map in the United States is going to change more from 2016 to 2024 than any period that I can remember in modern American politics. I mean, the map is going to change drastically. You remember we were talking about the days when I was running campaigns, 1988. Remember, Dukakis carried West Virginia,
right,
and lost California.
And lost New Jersey, right.
And New Jersey. I was running the Senate race in New Jersey in 1988. The Republicans carried New Jersey by about 9 points. All right. So,
in fact, if you look at West Virginia, 2 governors of Massachusetts, they both won West Virginia. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican. A huge difference in 20 years. Now, how about Texas, guys?
Well, James, I'm going to defer to James. He has been on this story for a long time. If the Democrats win Texas, they'll start talking about the Democrats' electoral lock. Go ahead, James.
So I thought people very much underplayed the 2018. I mean, that was a high turnout election that had very high Republican turnout. And when everybody said, "Whoa, blow Beto O'Rourke," he ran so strong because he ran so strong with young, appeal to young voters and non-white voters. The truth of the matter is, he didn't do any better with young voters or non-white voters than you would expect a Democrat to do. What really changed about Texas was the whites. And that's where Beto almost won. And so people sort of dismissed that and went back to his Texas. So, as you know, Al and I do a podcast. And the guy on Texas politics he teaches at the University of Houston. He's older than even we are. He's been there forever.
That's old.
And he does, consulting on redistricting maps. I mean, he just knows. He is the acknowledged expert on Texas politics. He's done on podcast. I think Biden is going to win. All right. It did start getting all of these recent polls over the transom. So Jonathan Martin goes there today, posted a story this afternoon. You can read that story, and you can see. The only people that think that the Democrats that think the Democrats can't win Texas are Democrats. The Republicans are scared to death, and they're not very shy about it.
No,
right. David, let me give you just 2 fascinating tidbits about Texas. the Dallas is represented by a freshman congressman named Colin Allred, former football player, civil rights lawyer. He will win in a landslide. He won last time he beat an incumbent. Houston is represented by Lizzie Fletcher, freshman Democrat who won last time, beat an incumbent, will win easily this time. Those two districts were the homes of George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. That's what's happened in Texas.
Well, how about Florida? How about Florida?
That has been a kind of a laggard for Democrats. I think it may be getting the early vote is not as encouraging as it is in other places. Mm-hmm. I think it might be getting a touch. I think we're going to be okay. I didn't think that 48 hours ago. I didn't think we were going to lose, but I've gotten a little more confidence here of late. But look, Florida is Florida. Right. I can't. What I can't reconcile is Biden. He's a non-incumbent with a 8-9 point lead. Right. How can you lose Florida? If you're competitive in Texas, how can you lose Florida? All right. It just at some point, there's the law of political physics. All right. I know some states always act as I've never in my entire life in politics have never woken up on Wednesday morning after the election and said, I just can't figure out how this happened. All right. You can see we're in a 2-point loss and you'd be outside, slightly out of maybe probability, but you could lose Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. That's not totally. But you won a national race by 9 points and you lose Florida. That's not going to happen.
Makes no sense.
That's just not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
So I'm going to some of the questions from our guests here. What are the prospects of us knowing before we go to bed, depending, of course, what time we go to bed, on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, that we'll know who the next president is?
Officially or in reality, David?
In reality.
In reality, I think they're high because there'll be lags in vote counts. But if James is right, and if it's kind of clear, if it's clear that Biden is either carrying Georgia or is very close in Georgia, I'm sorry, that's game, set, match. I mean, he's not, no way for Trump to win. I think same with North Carolina or Florida. So it won't be official. AP will be very cautious, but if that happens, you can bank it.
Let me make a point here, David. This is very important, and I hope the Biden campaign is listening. As soon as you know you're going to win, go down and declare victory. Don't wait. Don't wait for the AP. Don't wait for the official call. If you carry Georgia, you're going to win. If you carry Pennsylvania, you're going to win. Go down and declare victory. We did that. We did that in New Hampshire. Well, we didn't actually win, but it made effect. Do not wait. Do not wait for Trump to concede. Do not be polite. Get however you do it. Say the vice president is making a statement in 15 minutes, and they gotta cover that. They gotta cover that, and that sets the tone.
Albert and I and all the other people who understand where all those counties were that we've been throwing around, they know what you mean by declaring victory in New Hampshire. Why don't you tell the rest of the crowd what you meant? So
we had we dropped like crazy because we had to break in the Jennifer Flowers story and everything.
Yeah, for everybody who he is. We're talking about the
Clinton campaign, 1992 in New Hampshire. Yeah. And the exit polls came in, and they were actually more favorable to the Clinton campaign than the actual result. So we just said, let's just go out after the polls closed and say, we're a comeback kid. And so all the headlines flash over to comeback kid. Because when they finished casting the votes, I think Zongos won by like 5 points. Right. But the story of New Hampshire was not who won. It was that Bill Clinton was, of course, the press played along very well because he was a gut-shot Confederate soldier, leaning against a pine tree ready to die. And so of course, everybody loves the sort of redemption story in politics. But I'm really serious about this. As soon as look, these people are going to know very early. As soon as we know Pennsylvania, declare victory. and then Trump is going to be responding to everything you do, because they're going to pull every kind of Kaganami scheme that they can come up with and just be a winner and just act like a winner, because you're going to be a winner. Seize it and move on.
Now, Albert,
let the lawyers deal with that other stuff.
David, let me ask you, or any of our listeners who have more expertise than we do, I think that Supreme Court decision has been overplayed, and I'll tell you why. I don't think there are going to be very many votes that arrive after Election Day. I mean, Bob Casey said the other day, we're telling everyone, don't put anything in the mail. Put it in a drop box if you can, vote in person if you can. A lot of people have already voted. I think you're talking about a very small number of votes that will only matter if Pennsylvania is basically dead even. So I think
that's right, Al. But we've been in newsrooms for decades on election night, and about 5 o'clock we all get these exit polls, and we think we know what we're talking about. Will these exit polls mean anything because of the huge mail vote? Will they mean anything this time?
Well, they say they have adjusted for that, and they have all kinds of the AP, one of their chief clients is Fox News. They're doing 100,000 surveys Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday each. So they're and they're going to heavily tilt that to the battleground state. So I don't know. I wouldn't write a story based on exit polls.
I've never been in a newsroom. But if a candidate goes out and declares victory, they're going to cover that.
Oh, yeah. We'll cover it. Yeah.
And you better, I think James' advice is good, because Trump will do that and he ain't going to win.
He ain't going to win. But we're going to Biden's going to go earlier than him. If they're smart. I hope they're listening.
So one of the things that's valuable about those exit polls, both of you know, is that when you look back to trace the black vote, the Jewish vote, the female vote, you use those. Will we be deprived of that kind of information, do you think?
No.
Okay.
No. You won't. And some of the other polls, I mean, James knows that incredibly extensive and sophisticated Bloomberg polling operation all over the country. I don't know how much of that they're going to release after the election, but I mean, they're doing these huge samples in every state, which will give you all the micro numbers you need, David.
Right. And then for historical purposes, they adjust exit polls to the actual turnout.
Right.
So they're trying to guess it. So every poll is right, a month after the election.
Okay, so whether win or lose, what has been the effect of Trump on the presidency and on our politics? Insidious.
I mean, really insidious. And far greater,
but beyond
far greater than the policy problems, which I would say there are. I'm sure we have a number of people out there tonight, and who are watching and listening, who would disagree with that. But I think he has debased the presidency. He has coarsened the dialogue. I mean, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and George Bush didn't do that. They had bad moments, sure. The New York Times had a story. He had a campaign rally in Wisconsin the other day, and he told 130 untruths or lies in 87 minutes. I mean, that's 1.5 a minute.
That's an AFC North Division champion. Yeah.
It is. Eat your heart out, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, no, but seriously, it has. And I think the corruption, he was going to end the deep state. Remember that, David? He has had 4 of his closest associates indicted. I guess 5 indicted, 4 convicted, cabinet members who's had to resign. He's used the administration as a personal piggy bank. It's just awful. And I think it'll take the country and the Republican Party, particularly the Republican Party, a while to recover.
I think, first of all, I think when years after we're gone, that when our grandchildren or great-grandchildren, I think that the overriding story of the Trump administration is not going to be the malfeasance, the incompetence, the crudeness, the vulgarity. It's going to be the staggering corruption. I mean, the breathtaking, staggering, unbelievable corruption. I think the biggest effect of his presidency, I think the country will come back. I don't think we're going to be a corrupt country. I don't think people are going to follow that right. But what I think is the biggest thing is we have decimated confidence in one of the 3 branches of government. I mean, the way people feel about the judiciary now is just unbelievable. And any number of people that I know, if you would have said 6 months ago, we need to reconfigure the federal courts, it's, no. You'd be surprised if people that called me and say they got to do something about this. And I think that Mitch McConnell, I think this has been a horrific overreach. And I think people look at the Supreme Court and they don't view it as a judicial institution. They view it as a political institution. In that Kavanaugh opinion, I mean, here's a guy, the Supreme Court justice. He's got. Did they get? I don't know how many law clerks they got from the top 1% or the top 1% of law schools, and it came right in opinion. He's so political, and that just has never happened before, where you have something like this, and the confidence in the courts, in some of the clowns that they confirmed at this appellate level and the district level. I mean, there was a time that was not long ago when you walked into a federal court and you had a high degree of confidence that your case was going to be heard, it was going to be arbitrated, you'd have some decision based on something. I just am losing faith in people all around this country, or really, losing faith in the courts. And if we don't have that, we lose a lot as a nation. And when we had Bush v. Gore, I think that started it all. And every Democratic commentator said, well, we accept the court. This is part of who we are as a nation. And Al Gore said, okay, I'll accept that. It is going to be a long road back for these federal courts. And that is a staggeringly important institution in our country. And they have lost a lot of credibility.
Now, one of our guests asked a very good question. Why are you more confident in the polls in 2020 than you might have been in 2016?
And I just got back in. I lost you for a minute, David. James, you mind if I take that?
Yeah, of course I don't mind. Absolutely.
I think, first of all, and James alluded to this earlier, there's been some adjustment in the polls. Particularly in the upper Midwest, where they undercounted non-college educated whites. David, let's remember the national polls were not off last time. Right. I was doing the Bloomberg poll. We had Hillary winning by 3. Actually, it was 2.6 when you looked at it. She won by 2.1. The NBC Wall Street Journal was 4. It was some of the state polls that were wrong. So I think that's one difference. I think they've adjusted for that. The second difference is there were a number, and I think this is really different in this election. There were 14%, according to some reliable surveys, that didn't like either candidate. They really didn't. And at the end, they broke overwhelmingly for Trump. And it was not illogical. They said, hey, I don't like either one of them. What the hell? Let's go with something new, right? This time it's much more fixed. There are far fewer people who are at least soft, not even undecided, but soft because of that. And those few that are, if you think about it, and I talked to the Marquette poll director today, they're more likely to say in the end, hey, what the hell, I can't take 4 more years of this. So I think 2016, which some Democrats just obsess over today, I think it's a bad marker.
Now, Albert, most of your family income comes from television, which is why this question from Sam Marinucci, whom I happen to know is one of the leading political analysts in Toronto. He asked the following. You guys are saying this is over. Is there any point even bothering to watch TV on November the 2nd or 3rd?
Oh, gosh, yes. I'll undo everything I've said if I can guarantee that Sam will watch it. I don't want Sam, to have to, relive the Toronto Raptors on November 3rd. No,
actually, I think he's reliving the 1967 Maple Leafs, but go ahead.
Anyway, I think it's, yeah, of course we're going to watch it and we're going to see, and I'm interested. I'd be shocked if the outcome's not what we expect, but there's still particulars. James's point about Georgia, God knows Texas would be, probably the biggest single state story in my lifetime. So yeah, there's a lot to watch.
Well, what about all the Senate races?
Yeah.
I mean, Hillary, look, and there's some chance that you might see the face of a beaten Donald Trump. Who wouldn't stay up? Just maybe there's a 5% chance he'll show up, and you can watch him like he was getting off that helicopter after that Tulsa rally. I can't tell you that.
One of our other guests asked, and Albert, you might be the person to answer this, why it's taken 14 years for those Trump income taxes to be dealt with by the IRS?
Well, because the IRS is so unfair. They've been out for Donald Trump, for the last 40 years before he, while he was still at Wharton. It's just, David, the IRS commissioner has no idea what is in the Trump tax returns. This is simply a absolute lie. Every one of those taxes are not being audited. You can release your returns if they are being audited. He is simply not releasing them, and we suspected why before. We know why. The New York Times got a hold of him. Number one, he's not worth nearly as much money as he says. Number two, he has taken certainly illicit and I suspect illegal write-offs. Number three, he didn't pay any taxes. And number four, his family were feather bedders, which also may be in violation of the law. So if you had all of that in your tax returns, you're probably not going to release them.
Okay, so Jody Scaff, whom I happen to know from high school days and who is known beyond high school as the sage of Hampton, New Hampshire, she asked, who do you think how the Senate will go? Will it go Democratic?
James.
Look, there are probably, let's say, 8 Senate races that are plus or minus 2. What I think is the least likely outcome is it breaks 4-4. All right, they generally break one way or another, but Maine is plus or minus 2, North Carolina is plus or minus 2, South Carolina is plus or minus 2, the Purdue seat is plus or minus 2 in Georgia, the Texas seat is plus or minus 2, the Montana seat is plus or minus 2, the Iowa seat is plus or minus 2, probably Alaska seat is plus or minus 2. All right, maybe I forgot one, but I don't think I did. Colorado and Arizona and probably Alabama are not in that category. So I think of those, they'll mostly fall to one party. And right now, of course, I hope they do, but if I had to guess, I think they'll fall to the Democrats. Not all of them. I don't think all of them will fall, but there'll be a tilt one way or the other.
Well, I don't want you to think that only my friends are calling in, but Millie Myers, who lives 4 doors down from me here on Murray Hill Avenue in Pittsburgh, asks whether if we hadn't had the pandemic, what would this election look like?
I believe, and I wrote this a long time ago, I think that if the Democrats got their act together, which they did with Jim Clyburn's endorsement, I think Donald Trump was going to be defeated even without the pandemic. It would have been closer, but I think that the closest analogy I can find, and there are certainly differences profoundly in the economy, is 1980. The country really just didn't want 4 more years of Jimmy Carter. And I think if you go back to January and February, the country really didn't want 4 more years of Donald Trump. The Democrats, if they had nominated Bernie Sanders, I think that Trump would have won. But once the Democrats got their act together, I think a whole lot of things haven't shaken this race up much at all. It would have been closer, but I still think they would have won.
David, I want to say something about this.
Go ahead.
He was going, as soon as South Carolina happened, he was going to lose. If you go back and you look at the polling, if you look at the NBC Wall Street Journal poll in January of this year, it is not that much different now. If you look at his approval, it is not that much different now. It is a common myth, and that's exactly what it is, that Trump, he goes to Erie and said, if it wouldn't have been for COVID, I wouldn't have to be here with you people. All right? That's in his mind. The truth of the matter is he was doomed for defeat, and COVID came along. It would actually, if he would have been anybody other than Donald Trump, it could have helped him. He could have probably won if he'd have acted anything remotely like a leader, because he had a big event that could change people's perception of him. Look at what happened to these governors' ratings when this came. And I don't know how much, there's really not a lot of difference in his approval today than it was in January or February.
Absolutely.
He was on his way out then. I mean, look at you cannot underestimate, if I got a pound nail on that, you cannot underestimate the 2018 election. The highest turnout since women have granted the right to vote and the biggest margin. And Albert's right, it didn't happen in Ohio, but it looks like the delayed wave is getting to Ohio, and I hope it gets to Florida.
Now,
Yeah, David, let me tell you this. The Jared Kushner tape from Bob Woodward the other day is so revealing, where in April, he told Woodward, we've taken this over from the doctors. Now, let me tell you this. If you have cancer, do you want someone to say, you know what? We've taken it over from the doctors now. We're going to have Jared Kushner running it. Of course you don't, and that's what that is really the scandal of what they did in this terrible crisis. We have 5 times the death rate of Germany, which knew about the so-called Chinese flu at the same time we did.
Shaun Kerbar asks the following: do you believe Joe Biden can remain a centrist in spite of the pressure he'll get from the left wing of his party, or is that all a myth? Is that all just part of the folklore?
James?
Well, first of all, I don't know if Joe Biden, I'm a liberal. I'm just not a lefty. All right. And Joe Biden is running on the most, what I would consider, liberal platform by far. Any Democrats that run for president. It's not a left-wing platform, but it talks about things that expand healthcare coverage. It talks about, really aggressive tackling of climate, which I think is the biggest issue that we've ever faced since God knows when. I mean, it's a very forward-looking, I don't know what word progressive, but what it means, but Biden is certainly running his platform and his campaign is certainly to the left of what we ran on, and certainly to what President Obama ran on. So we get into these kind of nomenclature that I don't think actually reflects the time that we're in. And you look at all these Republicans for Biden, that they're embracing the whole platform. I mean, they're defending Biden. I mean, the whole country has just moved to accept things that have not been accepted before, and not just accepted some things, but like embraced them. I mean, even the Republicans are running that we got to cover people, mandate coverage of people with pre-existing conditions. I mean, none of them are running that market solutions are the answer. Nobody's running against gay marriage. No one's running against marijuana legalization. No one's running for the balanced budget amendment. No one's running for prayer in school. I mean, the entire dynamic of the country is shifting this way. And there's no doubt about that. Now, some of this lefty stuff is insane, but I don't think the country is nearly there.
Well, so, David, let me just add to that is 2 things. Number one, read a column by Max Boot in the Washington Post today. We can identify with a former Wall Street Journal editorial page writer. He reflects everything that James just said. It's really instructive. But also, the Democrats, I think they're going to control the Senate. They're going to pick up 15 House seats. Those new senators are not going to be Sanders-Warren senators. They're going to be Steve Bullock. They're going to be Mark Kelly, Teresa Greenfield, Sarah Gideon, Cal Cunningham. Those are all I hate the term. They are all centrists. I don't like that term, but they are the progressive mainstream of the party.
Well, I have 2 last questions, both for James. Louisiana Monroe hosts Appalachian State this week. I'm seeing the Mountaineers at minus 31.5. Who do you like in that one?
But they must be. They're minus 31.5. Yeah, ULM, they're the Warhawks. Right. And I got to go with my guys from Northeast Louisiana. They have a lot of talent up there in high school football in North Louisiana. Something tells me they're going to rise to the occasion. David, it's funny. I picked against the spread on Tony Kornhauser's show. And about 3 weeks ago, I said, Tony, I just can't do it. I got to come back after the election. I can't even concentrate. Honestly, LSU loses, and okay, hell with it, because this is the election. I want to get my life back to where I really care about this stuff.
Okay, well, the question that many people are wondering, seriously, I got 7 or 8 people asking the very same question. It's our last question. We've gone here 58, 59 minutes. Who is Mary Madeline going to vote for? I've been a policy about for a long time. It's worked well. I never speak for my wife. I think the 3 of us can agree on the value of that view. Anyhow, I want to thank both my friends Al Hunt and James Carville for their remarkable contribution to the conversation in Western Pennsylvania and beyond. To thank, of course, Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield for sponsoring this. To thank the staff of the Post-Gazette, for whom I've worked for 16, 17 years for their contribution in sponsoring this, and to thank most of all of you, to urge you all to vote no matter what the weather on next Tuesday, if you haven't already voted, to thank you very, very much for tuning in and for voting. I usually say for voting with your feet, for coming to our town meetings, but in this case, for voting with your fingers. Let your fingers do the walking and let your fingers do the talking. I'm delighted that we had such a good conversation. It's remarkable to me that Albert was able to actually conquer the high-tech challenges. And of course, James always makes a great contribution. And
David, this is the only place we've ever been invited back to. So
well, I know.
Yeah, we're looking forward to next year.
Yeah, well, don't be sure you'll get another one, but I have a suspicion. I have a suspicion that you'll be back again. Thanks to all of you, and good night.